quilty friend, it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and today we're going to talk about doing a pieced backing. Now I'm specifically doing this for the Mini Quilt Advent Calendar, the 24-day version, but everything that I show you is going to be completely applicable to whatever size quilt that you're working on. So let's get started and put together a pieced backing for a quilt. So my finished quilt is about 29 by 31 inches, but I need a bigger piece of backing than 29 by 31 for my quilt. So I have all these leftover cut into fat quarters. So you can see I've been like cutting into this fabric. So I have these leftover pieces and I want to piece these together to be able to make a pieced backing. Now, depending on your specific piece backing, generally we don't want a ton of seams in our backing. Our seams are all in the front, and any extra seams can line up, any seams in the backing can end up accidentally, I guess, lining up with seams on the front and create kind of lumps or bulk in the quilt. So less seams means less potential for that. But I'm not too worried about it. A lot of those seams end up kind of figuring themselves out in the batting, so they kind of get absorbed in the batting. So this is one of the biggest pieces that I have. I'm going to throw this one up here and I'm going to measure it. Now this also has the selvage on it. We're not going to have the selvage in the backing of our quilt. So this is 30.5. My quilt is 29 inches, and inch is not enough. Now, if you're doing a backing and you're having a long armer do it for you, they want usually 6 to 8 inches, depending on your long armer. I usually go like 8 to 10 inches. This is a mini quilt. I'm doing it myself, so I want at least 4 inches. I want at least 33 inches. So this doesn't quite cut it in terms of wide enough, but it is a good start. I'm going to see what other fabrics I have here that are nice big pieces. Now I'm not cutting these super perfect. This will end up getting cut nicer when I go to put everything together. I'm just trying to see what I have kind of to work with here. So this is another nice big piece. Obviously, again, not enough. And I have to remember that I'm going to lose a 1/2 inch for every seam that I put in here. So this is 38 inches, which would be a good size. Because even with losing 1/2 inch, 37.5, let's even call it 37 inches, that would be enough height. So these two fat quarters together, tall enough, but not wide enough. So let's go ahead and cut ourselves a little bit more fabric. Now I overlap this to account for seam allowance and also that selvage being trimmed off. Let's see if this will be enough here. This is 36 inches, so that's good. I just need a piece on the top. All right, that's now wide enough and tall enough for my mini quilt. Now I need to clean up some edges so that I can stitch them together. I'm going to stitch these two together, and then these two together, and then I'm going to stitch the top and bottom together. So it's just going to be 4 pieces, not a perfect 4 patch. Obviously, this seam and this seam aren't going to line up, but this is enough to make the backing for my quilt. All right, I'm going to grab these 2 pieces right here. And bring them to my cutting mat. I want this bottom edge mostly straight. Now I'm going to cut off this selvage, and I'm cutting through both pieces, making a nice clean cut. And now I can sew the seam, and I'm going to press it towards the dark. If these were longer pieces, you might want to pin them together to make sure there's no shifting, but these aren't that big, so I'm not worried about too much shifting happening. Alright, this one needs to be pressed towards the dark, and then I want to do the same with these 2 other fabrics. I want to make sure that they are lined up. This time, because these are the bottom, I want to make sure I'm lining up that top edge, and I want to cut off the selvage and as little of this as possible, but I've got some nick in here, so I want to make sure that that gets cut off as well. There we go. Double check. Yep, that looks good. Now we're going to sew this seam, and these are both about equally dark, and we don't have to worry about this seam lining up with the other seam, so I'm just going to press in one direction. It doesn't matter. Okay, I have the top and the bottom pressed, and if you needed to make this wider, you could absolutely add more and more pieces along the width of both of these, and you can also add another row if needed to be able to make a much bigger backing. I don't need a much bigger backing, so I'm not doing that, but use the same process to add width and add height. And now we need to sew these two together. But for those of you who are super math conscious, you may have noticed when I made this cut here, yes, these two pieces were perfectly lined up, but this line wasn't exactly perpendicular to this bottom line because this is a fat quarter. I just left it the way the fat quarter was cut, and sometimes fat quarters are cut a little wonky or a little not straight. Wasn't worried about that yet, but now that I'm going to sew these two together, it will be a problem. You'll see this one actually kind of arches down, and that's going to create a lumpy back. We don't want a lumpy back. So what I need to do is cut this bottom so it's a perfectly straight cut, and then cut this, the top of this bottom piece to make a perfectly straight cut, and that way the two will come together nicely. But these two, these are not, here, let's kind of put them above each other so you can see. These are not coming together nicely at all in any way. You can see this absolutely comes at an arch down. So really, 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 really easy way to do this, even though this piece is bigger than my mat. All right, so we're going to take this to the mat, and what I'm doing is I'm just folding it in half. And then this right here, this fold, is going to be my perfectly perpendicular line. So I'm going to line this up on the mat, and it's hard for me to see it away from me, so I'm just going to flip it and bring it closer to me, because the fold can be away from you or close to you, and we're putting this on the mat. There we go. And now I'm going to trim off the bottom, making sure that this line here and this line here are exactly perpendicular. And what that means is 90 degrees. What that means is like a square. So the lines on the mat, the horizontal and vertical lines on the mat, are perfectly perpendicular to each other. So this fold and this cut will line up both with lines on the mat. So I'm going to cut, and then I want to double check that it went all the way through both the top and bottom. And now, when I put this up on my design wall, I have a perfectly straight bottom to be able to line up perfectly with the top of this, except the top of this is not perfectly perpendicular either. So I'm going to do the exact same step with this. Fold it in half, put it on the mat, line it up with a line, and trim off that top to also make that perfectly straight top. And that way the back will not be lumpy, because having a lumpy back, it ends up with puckers. All right, I'm double checking. Yep, I cut through both layers. Perfect. Ta-da! You can see how beautifully those line up. So now, super easy, just sew the top and bottom together, press in one direction, and I'll have my piece back. Now there's some more fun that we can do with this piece back, so I'm going to sew that together and press it so that you can see the piece back, and then we're going to talk about some other really fun options that you have when putting together piece backs. Now that the backing is pieced together, it's ready to go, but you do want to measure it one more time to make sure that when you did these cleanup cuts that you didn't lose too much of the fabric, because it might have been that you were a little bit close, and now that you've done those cleanup cuts, your backing is too small, and that's totally fixable, but you want to know now, not when it's already on a long arm or when you're getting ready to base the top on, or even after you've basted it all together and done the quilting and then turn it over and see, oops, I was short. So make sure that you measure it, double check that this is big enough. And if it isn't, or if this just isn't interesting enough and you want to add some interest, it is really easy to add more at this point. So what you can do is you can take and do a cut right down one side. So we would fold this in half just like we did before, line up that fold with the line on the mat and make a cut, and then that would split this section off. You'd have a big hole in here, and now you can sew a big strip all the way down. You could do the same here, making a cut all the way across by folding it in half this way, lining up this fold with the mat, making your cut across here, and then sewing a big strip along this way. So you can add width and height even after your base pieces are sewn together, if you either want more interest or you need more width and height. So yeah, I'm going to leave it like this. I just needed enough fabric to be able to have a backing, and I wanted to be able to use the same fabric that was on the front. Another great question about backing is what fabric to use for the back. So when you're doing a scrappy backing, you can use fabrics from the front. This is what I did. I used leftover pieces from the Mini Quilt Advent half-yard cuts and piece those together for the back. You can also use like fat quarters if you had a fat quarter bundle and you used some of the fat quarters for the front of the project, but you had several fat quarters left over, or a half-yard bundle had several half-yards left over. You can piece those together. They're the same line. The fabrics are not in the front of the quilt, but they're the same line. So they look nice on the back. You can just use scrappy whatever. There are so many ways to make this your own, but now you know the basics to get a nice, smooth, flat, pieced backing for really any size quilt. Alright friends, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you're not subscribed. I offer quilty tips and tricks like this all the time, and I don't want you to miss out. So make sure you're subscribed. And friends, I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now.